If you've looked at the housing market lately or just tried to figure out where to park your savings, you might be feeling what experts are now calling financial nihilism. Really don't like that term, but I'm not the expert. The traditional milestones feel further away, and the rule book our parents used is being thrown out of the window. Today, my co host Matt White and I are unpacking a massive three-part domino effect reshaping the economy for the average viewer. First, we're going to look at new home builders and how they're literally shrinking the American dream and stripping it of its basic features just to keep things remotely attainable. Then we're going to dive into how that exact frustration is driving our generation to completely abandon some forms of traditional financial institutions in favor of crypto, AI advisors, and other alternatives. And finally, we're gonna follow the money. If traditional banks aren't funding our lives anymore, who is? We'll reveal how massive Wall Street private credit funds are quietly buying up your credit card debt, personal loans, and even your rent rewards. We're going over all of that and more on this week's episode of Road to Riches. Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of Road to Riches. Um, our first episode, or excuse me, our first article is one from the Wall Street Journal. Put it up here for us. It says flimsier cabinets and fewer windows. Home builders are skimping on the basics. This article goes through something that I've seen quite a bit over the last few months, but didn't really think was such a large issue as this article is making it seem. Obviously, they have more people on the ground doing more of the research, seeing more of these things, and it is a significant problem. Home builders are looking everywhere for ways to slash costs. They're finding them in cabinets, faucets, and even the garage door remote. Builders are opting for cheaper materials and rejiggering designs with cost savings top of mind. Particle board cabinets are in, hardwood is out. Countertops are becoming thinner. Walls now feature smaller and fewer windows. An automatic garage opener is sometimes a frivolous luxury. The cumulative effect is changing the appearance of newly constructed American homes. It kind of looks incomplete, says Erica Phelan, a real estate agent at Buyers Brokers of Florida. What this article is saying, and it goes even further on to say, calling out some companies by name, the largest builders, D.R. Horton, Lennar, etc. They're building new homes, and and part of this, of course, actually is shown up in something that we kind of mentioned in passing, maybe around a month or month and a half ago, where for the first time in history, the prices of new homes that are being sold has gone below existing homes. The fact of the matter is, these homes are being built more and more cheaply every single month. On my Instagram feed, um, I somewhat frequently get um, get posts by various home inspectors, and when they go into these new homes, they see things that we would never expect. There's doorknobs that aren't properly screwed in. There are countertops that uh, that move, or you can lift them up and down. They've got grout and ceiling in on bathtubs that is improperly done. You know, there are I've seen things where if gutters are included at all, then they're not placed on there properly, or there's holes uh in the shingles, right? So water can get in there because things are so expensive nowadays, especially when it comes to homes, and many young people are unable to afford them. Our generation, like we said before, is struggling more so than any generation in the past in America to be able to consistently buy homes. And so these new home builders, if they want to continue to sell homes, they're having to make the prices cheaper. And this is one of the ways by saving money on things here and there. By doing particle board cabinets, or MDF, I think they're called, instead of actual hard wood that a quality material that they're getting, an actual carpenter or cabinet maker to put together, and you know, you can save literally thousands of dollars on a kitchen set of cabinets, and it seems like that's exactly what these home builders are doing. Smaller homes, thinner walls, lower quality soundproofing, all the things that you would expect to be in a new home. I mean, we really expect these things to be move in ready, right? But these inspectors are consistently seeing that that is not the case. Um, of course, a lot of these things you can get negotiated into the contract to have them fix or repair, but that number one assumes that your inspector is going to find it. Number two assumes that they'll actually fix it, and number three, they messed it up once. Who's to say they won't mess it up again, right? Even if they do agree to fix it. All of that comes down to an even larger issue or a larger, I won't necessarily say issue, but a larger method that companies are using to get people to buy these new homes. When we go out and look for a mortgage, the main things people look at is going to be the first thing, right, which is the monthly payment. After that, they're going to look at the interest rate, the fees, things like that, right? Well, it, it's been the case for many decades now that home builders will typically have pretty good incentives to get people to buy the homes, whether they're going to pay down some points on the mortgage so your actual interest rate is lower, whether they're going to give you seller concessions so you don't have to bring as much money to the table. You can get in the home with less, whether they're lowering the down payment requirement, things like that. They're going to come up with ways to make it easier for someone to actually purchase the home. Well, interest rates right now for a bank mortgage are somewhere around 5 to 6 to 7%, depending on where you go, what your credit score is, where you're looking to purchase a home, the value of the home, etc. Um, but this article is showing that some of these builders are offering as low as a 3.99% mortgage rate, which is lower than you're going to get anywhere else right now. Right here, this little sentence: Warren Bryan, who's a person mentioned in the article, last fall bought a no frills D.R. Horton built house in Tallahassee, Florida. Unable to sell the house for months, the builder cut the price by $14,000 and offered Bryan a 3.99% mortgage rate. These incentives, these benefits are truly unprecedented. And I think this just goes to show a larger issue that we're seeing in the housing market, which is that because it is widely known at this point that we generally can't afford these homes, then these home builders are cutting corners and doing just about anything they can to move inventory in some way, because they would much rather have a $20,000 loss on a home and write off that $20,000 versus not be able to sell the home at all and lose the entire $400,000. What are your thoughts on this, Matt? I've gone through a lot, but we have different perspectives on this.
Right. So, on the whole, I largely agree. And while you were going over it, just being the devil's advocate that I am, I find it hard to throw the blame completely on builders here, uh, or even most of the blame on builders. The fact of the matter is that it is just it has become more expensive to build these homes. I mean, uh, it the older generations owning homes is not the only reason why home prices have gone up. It's also because these homes are getting more and more expensive to build. I mean, you and I have both seen it in our professions. We've noticed how the smaller homes are not being built, and there's a reason why smaller homes, the 1,000 square foot, the 1,200 square foot, et cetera, are not being built. These houses that are supposed to be 150, $200,000 quote unquote starter homes. In 2026, you have to face economic reality. Unfortunately, that is considered a starter home, but the point still stands. You don't see any of those being built, and there's a reason for that. Builders simply can't afford the regulation. They simply can't afford the materials, the massive amounts of work, labor and work and materials, and keeping up with regulation, especially since regulate housing regulation differs state by state and even municipality by municipality. It's simply not affordable to build these small starter homes anymore, and that has bled into the building of moderately sized homes. You get into the 1,600 to 2,500 square foot homes, like what is being discussed in the article. And these homes are already being built for close to 300,000, and that's just material costs. That's not counting labor costs. It's not counting finance costs that a lot of these builders, getting construction loans from banks. That's not counting that. And so they're already looking at a margin of close to 70, 75%, rather, sorry, 20 to 25% margin, a very, very low margin. Their gross profit is very small. And when you look at the total amount that the home eventually sells for. I say all of that uh, I say all of that in preparation for what my judgment on this is ultimately, which is, I mean, we have to start taking a serious look at housing regulations. We have to start taking a serious look uh, at what these builders are up against, and stop assuming, because I know a few people who particularly put the blame on these builders as if they're allergic to making money or something. uh, the fact of the matter is, if you don't make any money, you can't stay in business, and their margins are being squeezed because of a stagnant market, a stagnant housing market that is actually kind of declining in many ways, and they're simply trying to stay in business. And if they have to use uh, lower quality materials, which, don't get me wrong, I'm against, but at the same time, we have to look at it from their perspective. Are you willing to go out of business to for Are you willing to go out of business for uh, you know a preferential item that lies in your mind? Are you want wooden cabinets? The customer may not, but you do, and you're willing to go out of business, dying on that hill. Uh, Principally, and even realistically, it doesn't really make sense. Um, but when you look at, in the article, median square footage has dropped from around 2,500 square foot to 2,150 square foot, or yeah, 2,500 to 2,150. You look at the different materials being used, the lower quality materials being used. uh, you want to blame the builders at first. When you look at them, you're like, hey, builders, what's going on here? But if you're actually in the business of working with home builders, like you and I both are, and seeing their margins, seeing what they're up against in terms of permits, in terms of regulation, in terms of inspection, uh, and you start to realize, like, oh, okay, so maybe they get a little bit of the blame, uh, uh, you know just to appease the masses, but majority of the blame I would put on the regulatory agencies, who, quite honestly, haven't really done a very good job at regulating homesteads anyway, and the building of homesteads. However, I have heard a lot about uh, some builders who are cutting corners, and they're told they're cutting corners, but they just don't care. And I have heard stories about that, especially here in the Oklahoma City metro. Uh, And this article kind of sheds some light on why they legitimately can't afford to do things the way that they used to. It's a changing market, uh, and it right now it's a declining market, and they're just trying to stay in business. How I would say this, impacts the average viewer of the show is that, they're getting a lower quality product for more money. It is shrinkflation. Shrinkflation has now reached the housing market. And I would argue it's been there for quite some time, but we're really starting to see the effects of it now. And so, do you ask yourself, do you settle for a shiny new cookie cutter build that might fall apart? uh, or do you hunt for an older home with much better, quote unquote bones, a much better structure, but the aesthetics are dated? And you know, these are the questions that are being asked. Of okay, well, if these new homes are of a worse quality build, and uh, it, and older homes may have been built with a better skeleton and may have better materials in them, would it be cheaper to just and buy an older home and then slowly but surely put better materials in it? You already know that the veneer was constructed with good quality materials, not the materials that are being used now to cut costs, but good quality materials, because building that house was, maybe a little less regulated, a little cheaper when it was built. And uh, and do you just do the math in your head and say, well, it would be cheaper for me to buy this older house and slowly but surely like renovate it, maybe replace the cabinets if they need to be replaced, maybe paint the cabinets yourself, things like that. And unfortunately, those are I don't necessarily like that these questions we have to ask of ourselves, but it is unfortunately the economic reality of our current situation, and is kind of affecting Gen Z's whole attitude, and even younger millennials on investments in the market. So, final point: do you even blame Gen Z now for throwing their hands up in the air, if a starter home, quote unquote, is just a poorly built tinderbox that still costs 400,000? Do you blame them for walking out of the market? In my opinion, there's no wonder that they're walking out of the market and instead throwing their money at other things. You have a generation of what you're going to build, and in my opinion, the boomers have built a generation of renters. Gen Z is a generation of renters. We have zero access to the housing market. The access that we do have is subpar. It's simply worse than any other generation had it. Uh, I mean, older generations that didn't have the technology that we have, they didn't have the knowledge that we have because of our technology. Things like AutoCAD, things like the internet, and how amazing it has gotten. Even things like AI, where you can help it build a blueprint, you can help it build plans, and everything like that. We are the most technologically advanced generation in history, and yet the boomers and other generations before us had better houses and a better market outlooks than we do, and that's a problem. And it's bleeding right into how Gen Z invests their money as well. Um, and so, can you really blame them?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I really don't think you can. Um, I do agree that yes, the big issue here that unfortunately will probably never actually be solved is that yeah, cheap starter homes have essentially been regulated out of existence until things loosen up, whether when it comes to labor costs, lowering or eliminating the minimum wage, for example, shrinking uh, the uh, uh, the work base, and keeping things in house is also going to be able to lower some costs, or at the minimum keep the cost the same while raising the quality. Because not to get completely on that political side of things, but it is very commonly known that although immigrant populations, when it comes to building houses, can be quicker with it than American builders, especially when it comes to the particular trades like plumbing, electricians, etc. American workers are typically produce more high quality products. But even getting away from that, since you said that you were playing devil's advocate a little bit, I want to do the same thing. Where we do have, at least in some areas, in some cases, people still do have cheap options for homes. We don't really want to buy a trailer home or manufactured home, but they exist and they're cheap and we can get them. Right? There are
Mhm.
tiny homes that are being built in some areas. Barn dominiums is another term that I hear thrown around. Even some people are getting shipping container homes and living in those. And these are all affordable options. Although, of course, the main issue with them is that the supply is relatively limited. They're not available everywhere. But if you just wanted a cheap home, why are we not seeing people of our generation go for those options that are there?
Honestly, because nobody wants to live in a shipping container. But uh, yeah, I see your point. I appreciate it, but at the end of the day, what's really frustrates me, and I think frustrates a lot of our viewers, if not all of our viewers, is that this idea of, and of course, I may, I, r- I don't know if even I'm going to agree with what I'm about to say. Of course, life isn't fair. Just deal with it. But it simply isn't fair, right? This that previous generations, they get they get access to and they get access to a free real estate market, a booming real estate market, and in many cases since the boomer generation, uh, a booming economy. And Gen Z is a little bit like what we've discussed as bag holders in the stock market. We're left holding the scraps. We're holding the bag on as boomers are on their way out. Um, and and so that is why the affordable options, which you are right, they are there. We don't want that because we know previous generations got this, and so why must it be regulated away for us? And um and it's difficult. It's difficult, even for me, to look at a market, even my area, that is as expensive as it is, and just see the Dave Ramseys of the world saying, oh well, just put a little bit into your savings here and there, and stop drinking your Starbucks, and stop eating your avocado toast, and maybe try biking more and driving your car less, and buy an older car, blah blah blah. And I'm like, right, but you created this. This is you. It is because of people like you who look down for some reason on younger generations who are genuinely upset with your conduct. They're genuinely upset with your argumentatively greed, uh, and and your disregard for any other generation besides yourself, your selfishness. that the market is the way that it is. You are the reason for that. And no, we're not going to buy your storage containers. We're not going to buy. We're not going to buy your 700 square foot scraps that this your 21st rental property that you just had to get rid of because not because you couldn't afford it, but you couldn't afford the gas to drive between all of your rental properties. No, we don't want your scraps. We don't want to live in your shipping containers. We would have liked you guys not to ruin the economy for us, not to ruin this for us, but instead, and you see the behavior right there at the end with the boomer widows now coming up. And again, I say it with a grain of salt because I'm not exactly too big of a fan of the millennial generation. Uh, and as the children of boomers, they have turned out to be a disappointment. And it wasn't until Gen Z came around that we started to see resurgences in important and, in my opinion, important things in America, important ideologies. But you gave all of your money to your wives and told your children to go fend for themselves. And now I'm not saying that anybody is entitled to anything, but what I am saying is it's an interesting pattern of how you have lived your life and how you guys have clung to power since you became of the age to vote. And then when you leave this earth, you disregard anybody but yourselves. And so again, I say again, we don't want your storage container. We don't want your 800 square foot actual tinderbox, because it was built in 1947. We would like to participate in the real estate market that you participated in, that you bought for 15,000 back in 1974. But that is walled off for us, and that's where the frustration comes in, and that's what I would say is the other side of that argument. It's it's a little bit sad. It's a sad reality that really is the whole purpose of the show is to try and tell people like, okay, we're not going to be the Dave Ramseys of the world, where we're just like, hey, sometimes you just have to toughen up, and maybe if you stop drinking coffee, then you'll be able to afford a $400,000 starter home. But rather saying, hey, look, we see you, we are you, you, Nyaki, and me. We are Gen Z. We see the exact same problems that Gen Z is seeing, and we actually are afflicted by the same problems. But we're also going to tell you how it is as well, because there's no point in sugarcoating it. Okay, we got to put together a budget. We got to put together a budget. We've got to put money into savings for a rainy day. We've got to do small steps because a lot of people don't even know about these things, and it it's a frustrating topic, and I understand that those options exist, and I imagine our viewers do as well. But uh, we don't want that. And the reason we don't want that is you guys are you guys and generations before you or after you participated in the market. So why are you're actually blocking it from us? Um, and so maybe I probably went over a little bit on that, but that would be my response to that.
Yeah, it's fine. I think it's a good response. I mean, really to kind of sum that up. I mean, the sentiment is exactly like you said. The generations before us, they were able to climb a ladder that was built and put in place by the generations before them. But as soon as they get to the top, they decide that, oh, they're going to pull the ladder up behind us. Well, that is a very sad thing. It's not fair for us, but at the end of the day, we've got to say, well, I guess I'm going to shoot a grappling hook and go up.
Hmm.
We've got to get there somehow. And this is one of the things that we're actually seeing right now, where even though homes are extremely expensive, some people still able to afford them, some aren't. But many of us who can afford these homes, we're just saying, we're going to build our wealth in a different manner. And that brings us perfectly to our second article, which is from the World Economic Forum. Don't really like that organization, but it's a good article, some good information, so we're going to talk about it. Um, just kind of starting off here, Gen Z is investing a little bit differently in terms of the opportunity that we have to invest. It is by and large much more widespread than previous generations. Um, Gen Z invests very differently from the generations that precede them. About a third started investing in university or early adulthood, which is double the rate of millennials investing at that age. Moreover, more than 50% of Gen Z individuals surveyed by the forum said that they started to learn about investing before entering the workforce, compared to only about 20% of baby boomers. Additionally, let me find that article or that line go down here. Gen Z is also more likely to invest in complex products such as crypto or alternative asset classes than other generations. Crypto, for instance, makes up more than one third of the portfolio for 71% of Gen Z investors. Comparatively, Gen X and baby boomers' investment portfolios tend to have more traditional compositions with higher levels of diversification and risk hedging. What that means in plain English, right, is that Gen Z started investing earlier than the generations before them. We started investing in different things like crypto, NFTs when they were popular and still a thing. And even outside of that, a very large portion of us still are invested in more traditional brokerage products such as a 401k, an IRA, or a standard brokerage account. Or even if we just have, a savings account, a high yield savings account, something like that, where we're able to get more return than inflation. This is a very good thing for our generations because we're looking at the economy and we are saying, I can't afford a home, but I still want to be set up for my retirement. What can I do instead? And that, what's the word I'm looking for? That industriousness, right? That we show is what's going to eventually make things okay for us in the end. Additionally, we talked about regulations a little bit with the housing issue. The hope, of course, is that when more of these older individuals move out of their positions in Congress and other positions of legislative power, and we start to step into these roles, that we will be more amicable to our situation and institute policies that on whichever, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, that have the intention of making things more affordable for us. And I think that is admirable, and it's something that we can look forward to in the next couple of decades. Um, but again, this article for me is it's a feel good article. To be able to say that we are still doing something, we are putting our money um, into assets that are going to appreciate in the future. The fact that more of us are investing at an earlier age is a great thing to me because we have so much access to easy stock trading through apps such as Robinhood or Webull. If you're not going to go to a more traditional investment firm, such as I use Charles Schwab, right? Um, there are again alternative methods of investment that we're in, such as crypto. Plenty of exchanges. I mean, I think Coinbase is probably the biggest um, right now. So if you're involved in that, while I don't necessarily have anything in crypto, it that doesn't mean that it's a bad option. We're getting involved and we're learning more, and
Right.
some of us are even allowing AI to direct our investments to some degree. I haven't tried that. I don't know if it's effective or even safe, or if the information that's being put out is good. But all of us have the ability to find something that works for us, and whether or not we want to go it alone or if we want to work with a professional, of course, I would always recommend at least seeking the advice of a professional, whether you work with them long term or not. But again, everyone's situation is different. So the fact that we now have the information, the resources, and the drive to figure out what's best for us and to act on it, I think can only be a good thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And let's stick to the feel good parts of that of what this article entails, because just looking at it myself and everything, I you and I both know exactly why Gen Z is investing earlier than previous generations. Uh, so sticking with that side, yes, I think that this is really, really good. And again, it's like you said, an indication that Gen Z actually wants to get their money out there into appreciating assets, wants sees the situation for what it is, and says, "Hey, I'm going to do something about it." And which is a sign of perseverance, actually. I really, really like that. That Gen Z evidently has come out and said, "You know what? Nobody's going to feel sorry for me. The quote unquote social media financial advisors are not they're not out for my best interest. They're telling me things that would be advice if it were 30 years ago, and so I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to get my money into something that appreciates. If I can't get real estate, then I'll go to stocks. I'll get into the AI boom. I will get into crypto. I will start doing all of these things, even using what I think actually is an incredible technology, artificial intelligence, even using artificial intelligence wisely to say, hey, let's analyze this stock together. Let's be responsible about this. What am I missing here? Should I invest? Should I divest? Or should I divest? And so, these things are very, very uplifting. I will agree with you on that. I also wanted to bring up that you know Gen Z Gen Z starts to understand that they may not have the same benefits that their preceding generations had, and so they have to take care of these things themselves. Unfortunately, our generation is beginning to realize the Ponzi scheme that is Social Security, and they're like, oh well, that's fine. I will simply go into the stock market and create my retirement portfolio like you're supposed to. And uh, yeah, I agree that this is incredibly uplifting. It's very, very good, and it's sort of the basis of this show is to say again, like I said about the housing situation, being honest with Gen Z and being honest about the situation, and what they face in an economy that was not built for them, in an economy that was actually taken advantage of by previous generations, and uh, you know it was certainly not made better for them like it was for previous generations. Uh, and so, but we also want to tell them, hey, there are still avenues. Here they are. Here's your avenues, right? And uh, it's very uplifting. It's inspiring, both as a member of Gen Z myself, but also a host of this show. It means that at least at least Gen Z as a whole is starting to have these same kinds of sentiments, and will actually benefit from the things that we're saying. uh, as far as the opportunity here, this could be incredible, especially if Gen Z sticks with it, and potentially we could go forward and start to prove, because we all have retirements, because we've been investing since we were in our early 20s, like you said earlier, that, well, like the article says, earlier than previous generations. We can prove numerically that even though Social Security wasn't there for us, we were still able to build a very large retirement portfolios, uh, and make that as an indictment against government safety nets, and against things like that, especially because Social Security takes out 12% of your paycheck, every paycheck, and your employer has to match that. So even though we're paying for Social Security, we still found a way, and it's perseverant. It's inspiring for me as a member of Gen Z. Um, and even we clearly don't trust the big banks anymore. This is my last point. We don't trust big banks anymore, but you know we're all flocking to fintech apps. Um, and interestingly, those fintech apps don't necessarily have the cash to fund our lives. So you know who is actually bankrolling the modern consumer? In other words, uh, these fintech apps, they don't necessarily, they're not producing the kind of returns for us that we necessarily maybe should get, arguably, uh, or that match our investment intensity. So what is actually bankrolling the modern consumer? What's going on in that avenue? And that's a perfect pivot, I think, into the next article, uh, from the Wall Street Journal. And this article is essentially going on about how private credit, because it's largely unregulated. There are regulations for private credit, but not nearly to the point of actual lending institutions, or commercial lending institutions. That is, private credit is now on the hunt for credit card debt, and uh, I'll just read the first paragraph here. The article itself is rather lengthy, but it'll give us the gist. Uh, when Wells Fargo told the fintech Built that it would no longer be the lender for its rent rewards credit card, Built scrambled to find another large bank partner. When that failed, Built wound up with private credit funding. And so and then of course what the article goes on to say is that private credit, because it's unregulated, and because it doesn't necessarily have to answer as much to the government as regular lending institutions do, commercial lending institutions, uh, it 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 now has the ability to go after these credit card companies, go after these credit offerings, and essentially take over. And this is, in my opinion, this is kind of a bad sign. This is a private. Again, it's a little indicative of what happened in 2008, or rather 2007, leading up to 2008, where these private credit institutions get into these processes that were before in the hands of commercial credit institutions, and they were largely regulated that way. And they were. This isn't an endorsement of regulation, but it is saying that some regulation is it's fair, and there is an argument to be made that they should exist. Um, and all of that to say, private credit gets involved in these processes that were before largely regulated, and you get something like the mortgage-backed security crisis of 2008, um, because private credit doesn't have to answer to anybody, really. And I will also say that it's an indictment of the system currently against against commercial banks. And you'll notice the contrast in the aftermath of 2008. I personally don't see this going well, and I think that once it builds up and eventually the bubble bursts like it did in 2008, uh, we will see the same thing we saw back then, which is, oh well, we're not going to go after what we're going to go after the smaller banks, even the statewide banks or region wide banks like Comerica or Fifth Third or these or banks that are that large but not necessarily as large as the financial giants of Citi and Bank of America and Wells Fargo and them. We're going to go after the Coméricas of the world, and for the things that the Lehman Brothers did, or for the things that Bank of America engaged in, and so this is kind of the same story. Private credit, because of its lack of regulation, it's a better value offering than commercial institutions, and so that's my opinion on it. I'm interested to hear yours. Before the show, we actually had a pretty good conversation about this, and his ideas on it are a lot more interesting than mine. So over to
I
you.
would I wouldn't necessarily say interesting, but definitely more radical than yours. Um, I think, as you kind of briefly mentioned, that I feel like the most important thing about this to know is really that this is kind of like a one for one mirror in some ways of the global financial crisis. So think of it this way, right? You said that that they're going to go after the regional banks, which is pretty much true. The reason for that is because there's this idea of too big to fail, right? So even though J.P. Morgan, we'll go with them at the time, was also in a bad situation due to the subprime mortgages and things like that. All the banks, more or less, were engaging in this, but the Federal Reserve Board and the U.S. government got together and they said, "Hey, J.P. Morgan is too big. We can't let them crash. They're going to take the economy with them." Right? So J.P. Morgan got not only a go ahead from the government, but essentially a paid bailout instead for them to say, "Hey, we're gonna give you basically anything you need, so that way you can take over a bank that we're gonna specifically choose for you," which they chose to be Chase Bank, which is why now it's J.P. Morgan Chase. That's how that happened, and it's that idea is the same thing that's happening here, right? Where we have banks that are making loans outside of their risk tolerance because they know that they'll be backed by these private credit institutions. These private credit institutions being number one, less regulated, but number two, more risk tolerant, means that these banks have loosened their policies to accept and other small financial lending institutions. They've loosened their policies a little bit to be able to take on loans that are generally outside of their risk tolerance. These loans then get passed on to the private credit institutions who say, we like this loan. It's a granular loan. It's gonna shore up our balance sheet, shore up our books, supplement our cash flow a little bit, and it's so far below our risk tolerance that we really don't even have to monitor it at all. Eventually, if these large purchases of debt eventually do go belly up, then like you said earlier, Matt, these private credit companies will just go after the banks, go after the other financial institutions, and attempt some type of takeover. Whether it's going to be, hey, we're gonna play a little nice and come up with some other method for you to pay this back over time, cool. Whether it's we're going to be a little bit more aggressive and we're going to sue you for the money that we're owed. That's another option. And then, of course, the final option, which is the most aggressive, is that they're just going to sit here and say, hey, small city, state, or regional bank, you owe us a few $1,000,000, and we understand that you may not have that available on hand right now to give to us. We're just going to take equity in your company. And they do that enough times, these private credit institutions are going to get pretty close to a controlling share of ownership in these banks, and then they're just going to cross the line and make them a subsidiary. Either that or sell them off to the next highest bidder. I mean, that's what private equity does all the time is to take ownership in a company, increase its value through optimization and cash flow and increasing cash flows, and then sell them off to the next highest bidder. The private credit institutions are going to be able to do the exact same thing. And the fact that no one is stepping in and saying at every level we need to be stringent and judicial with who we loan money to means that everybody on this chain is at risk for these bad loans.
Right.
Back leading up to '08, the issue then was that we're going to take on loans that we know are bad, the subprime mortgages. We're going to package them up, and then we're going to sell them to somebody else. This shifted the exposure from the original bank onto the other financial institutions and the backing banks. This is exactly what the banks are doing now, where these private credit institutions they want credit card debt, they want auto loans, and all these other things. I'm honestly a little bit surprised that the government hasn't stepped in already, because
Right.
at least the Federal Reserve is supposed to be monitoring these types of things. What a lot of people don't understand, and I'm going to wrap this up because we're a little short on time, but I need to make this evident. A lot of people don't understand that the Federal Reserve is in charge of a lot more than just printing money. One of their main focuses, their main functions, is actually regulation of federal banks. So yeah, they're going to be in charge of the JP Morgan, who has $1.7 trillion in assets. They're going to be in charge of the Bank of America that has, I believe, 1.4 million, or trillion. I'm sorry, 1.4 trillion in assets. I think Citibank is next, and then Wells Fargo after them. But all four of these banks have over $1 trillion in assets. The number five bank is somewhere around 700 billion, or even less than that. So yeah, there is a clear distinction between the banks that the government is going to say are too big to fail and we're not going to go after them, and the ones that can just be bought up if nothing else.
Right.
And so the Fed, as a regulatory agency for the banks, is supposed to be the exact organization that is going in and saying, we're not going to allow these banks to take on this amount of risky debt in the manner that they're doing, because we are the ones that came up with the regulations out of 2008 to avoid this exact same situation. But
Right.
no, it's all about whoever has the most money, has the most influence, and they're going to continue to be able to do whatever they want.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I can't stand about not only the American government, but just the idea of government in general. That
Right.
it's never about the people that they say that they want to that they care about, that they say they want to protect. It's always about where is the influence and how far up does that influence go, because the individuals never have it.
And
Uh,
like you said, real quick, um, and you know what? This is yet another story of yet another story that I would like to use to say Gen Z and people in general, take your money out of these large banks. These large banks, they don't really care about you. They don't have your best interests at heart. You are, and of course this can be true for a bank that is not necessarily Bank of America, but it is definitely true for Bank of America, and the JP Morgans of the world, that you are just a number. In fact, In fact, nobody will ever, you could become a millionaire and it's possible your branch of, let's, take a name out of the hat, your branch of Wells Fargo will not know your name. But I can tell you this, that the smaller institution, even the medium-sized institution, will know your name. And that is and that's not only this is not only an endorsement of taking your money out of these big institutions and putting them into the small institutions. This is also saying, hey, uh, why we say all of these things that are an indictment of how Wall Street operates. They operate in dubious ways, and this may have something to do with private credit, but these large banks also engage in private credit. They have their own private credit branches, uh, investment banking and the like. Take your money out of them. Uh, First of all, you're going to be respected a whole lot more, just in my opinion, at a smaller bank. And no, this isn't because I work for a smaller bank. This is because I genuinely, I genuinely, because again, like, why do I care if you bring your deposits here or to my bank? Uh, I genuinely don't understand people who complain about this exact issue. And it is an issue. They have a right to complain about it, but still put their money in Chase. Why? Because it's convenient. Because it's convenient. Chase doesn't have very many problems. They have a very, very diligent operational structure, and I'll give it to them. They do. But, um, but these people are the people who created the 2008 crisis. The types of the JP Morgans of the world have created financial crises for over a century now. And my opinion is we just shouldn't endorse that. We should go elsewhere. And sometimes it's a little more expensive to go elsewhere, I'll completely admit. But this is which that should be, an internal dialogue with each person. Is it worth the extra convenience of doing business with a bank that doesn't really seem to ever have my best interests at heart as a customer of theirs, overpaying maybe a little bit more to go get a loan at a smaller institution, or receiving a little bit less in terms of savings return, or money market return, or what have you. And I'll just leave our viewers with that sentiment.
Yep, I completely agree. You hit the nail on the head. There are benefits to banks of any size. In general, the larger the bank, the more the capabilities and convenience you have, and the smaller the bank, the more they rely on the relationship. So everybody should just do some shopping around and figure out what fits best for them.
Right.
But again, the what we consider to be a better bank is generally going to be more towards the mid-size or smaller end. Not necessarily the small list, right? Because you still do want some features, right? But in general, if you're looking at the top four, maybe even five banks, you're not going to be treated like someone that matters unless you
No.
have quite literally millions of dollars. For example, when I used to work at Wells Fargo, we really didn't care about you that much until you had about $10 million with the bank. And the reason for that is because at that point, you will belong to our private bank and you get your own personal banker. At these
Right.
smaller banks, you're going to have your own personal banker no matter what, because that's their business model, is maintaining a relationship. They're called
Right.
relationship managers and personal bankers for a reason. They care about you as a person rather than just trying to sell to the next person and meet their goals. But to wrap things up, the entire financial ecosystem is shifting beneath our feet. We're paying more for less when it comes to our houses. We're trusting algorithms and influencers over more traditional banks with our life savings. And the everyday credit we rely on is being quietly bought by these massive private equity and private credit funds. The game has changed, but the goal remains the same: building long term, durable wealth. You have to be hyper aware of what you're buying, whether that's a particle board house, a risky altcoin, or a new line of credit from a flashy app. From me, Niamki Buchanan, and my co-host Matt White, thank you very much for listening to us today. And for those who are returning listeners, thank you for listening every week. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe to the podcast. New episodes come out every Thursday. Again, thank you very much for watching. Please leave a comment if you'd like. Um, and thank you for joining us on The Road to Riches. We'll see you next Thursday.